She paid for first class, she held titles, awards, and built life-saving technology. But when a black CEO asked for her meal on an international flight, something unspoken happened, something no one expected. Why was her name never spoken by the crew? Why did others receive warm towels and wine, but she was overlooked again and again? And when the plane landed, why did the entire flight crew go silent before being removed from duty altogether? This isn't just a story about airline service. It's a story about power, presence, and the quiet ways bias can travel even at 30,000 feet. In this emotional journey, you'll witness not just injustice, but how one woman transformed humiliation into a legacy, a ripple into a wave, and a silent moment into a global conversation. So, what really happened on Flight 371? If you're ready to feel, reflect, and question what dignity really means, hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's begin this powerful, true-to-life story. Black CEO denied first-class meal, then fires entire flight crew after landing. The carpeted jet bridge was quiet, the low hum of the aircraft waiting just beyond the door. Dr. Nadia Bennett adjusted the strap of her black leather shoulder bag as she stepped aboard Skylure Air Flight 371. Her heels tapped softly on the metal floor, each step deliberate, graceful, and calm. She was used to flying first class, used to the silence, used to the invisible glances, but something about today felt different, though she couldn't yet name what it was. "Welcome aboard," said a flight attendant at the entrance, glancing quickly in her direction. No eye contact, no smile, just a reflexive politeness that evaporated the moment a tall white man stepped in behind her. "Mr. Caldwell, always a pleasure." The same attendant beamed. "Seat 1C right this way." Nadia said nothing. She only offered a faint nod and moved forward toward her own seat. It wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, she had chosen the same one on nearly every transatlantic flight she took, seat 1A, right by the window. Quiet, distant enough from the noise, close enough to the landing gear of control. She eased into the wide leather chair. Her blazer, ivory white and perfectly tailored, rustled slightly as she settled in. A small black pin rested on her lapel, a subtle tribute to her late mother, who had sewn the original prototype of that emblem when Nadia first launched her company. Her company. Her legacy. The screen in front of her was already glowing. A short welcome video played with Skylure's signature tagline, "Elegance above the clouds." Nadia smiled faintly. She'd seen it dozens of times before. But in moments like these, when the world expected her to be invisible, it reminded her that her presence in spaces like these was not by accident. It was earned. She placed her tablet on the tray table, unlocking it with a gentle touch. Contracts, executive summaries, and itinerary notes slid into view. Zurich, Global Ethical AI Forum, keynote speaker, front row panel, featured guest dinner. It was a high-profile weekend, one that required her focus and grace. A rustle of fabric brought her attention back to the aisle. "Good afternoon," said another voice, closer, softer. Nadia looked up. The woman was neatly groomed, her blonde hair pulled back in a tidy twist, her uniform pressed to perfection. But her smile stopped at the corners of her lips. Her eyes, though outwardly neutral, flickered with a thin layer of judgment. "I'm Riley. I'll be attending to first class this evening," she said. "Let me know if you need anything." "I pre-ordered my meal last week," Nadia replied politely, her tone warm but steady. "The salmon with heirloom vegetables. I also selected a 2012 Pinot from the reserve list. Confirmation should be in the system." Riley nodded, but didn't write anything down. Instead, she said, "Of course, we'll do our best." Then, with a faintly dismissive glance at Nadia's tablet, she turned and walked away. Nadia watched her go. There was nothing overt, no insult, no mishandling of her luggage, no raised voice, just coolness and a small omission of respect, one that might have gone unnoticed if this were the first time, but it wasn't. The cabin filled slowly. 3 white men in tailored suits occupied the rest of the front row. Their briefcases were monogrammed, their conversations clipped, confident. Nadia didn't mind. She'd sat among them for years, but she always noted the difference in tone, the way flight attendants often called them by name even before the seatbelt signs dimmed. Still not used to it, she whispered to herself, leaning back into the seat. Outside the window, the tarmac stretched wide and empty, a flat sea of concrete beneath an overcast sky. Somewhere across that distance, her younger self walked in her mind wearing her first suit from a discount rack, clutching a file full of unreviewed patents, praying someone in that boardroom would listen to her pitch on AI diagnostics. No one had, not until 5 years later, when those same patents saved a rural hospital chain from collapse. She looked down at her watch, 20 minutes to departure. A small sigh escaped her lips. It wasn't the food, it wasn't even Riley. It was the feeling, the one she couldn't quite name, the one that crept in during quiet moments like these, where everything looked perfect on the outside but felt quietly off on the inside. The murmur of laughter came from 1C. One of the men, Caldwell, apparently was telling a story about breaking golf deals over scotch in Geneva. Riley stood nearby, offering a tray of champagne flutes with practiced ease. She didn't offer one to Nadia. Instead, she turned and walked toward the galley. Nadia didn't flinch. She'd noticed it too many times to react. But she did reach down and open her tablet again. She navigated to a secure folder labeled Service Integrity Protocol. Then she paused. Her finger hovered above the screen. Was it really worth it over a missed flute of champagne? Her mind answered in memories, not words. She saw herself at 28, mistaken for catering staff at a tech conference. She remembered a hedge fund executive telling her she spoke well for someone in her position. She remembered a junior recruiter once asking if her company had a white male founder on the back end. She closed her eyes. No, this wasn't about the champagne. It was about being unseen, unacknowledged. Again. She tapped the screen. A prompt appeared, begin incident log. She pressed, yes, then leaned back in her chair, looked out the window, and said softly to herself, almost like a prayer wrapped in iron, "I've earned this seat. I won't apologize for it." And from that moment forward, the quiet flight across the Atlantic would become something very different than what anyone on board had expected. Something that would make every seat on that plane matter a little more than it ever had before. By the time the aircraft began taxiing toward the runway, the hush of luxury had fully settled in the first-class cabin. Seats were reclined slightly. Champagne flutes gently clinked against polished tray tables, and the subtle floral scent of citrus diffusers hung in the air. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that came with wealth, with power, and, more often than not, with a mutual agreement, don't disturb the order. Dr. Nadia Bennett didn't disturb it. She never had. She reached into her leather case and pulled out a slim, handwritten notepad. It was an unusual habit in a world of cloud drives and encrypted AI systems. But for the last decade, she had made it a practice to write 3 things on every long-haul flight, the intent of her journey, the moment she felt most grounded in herself, and the moment she realized something was off. She had already filled in the first 2. She wrote slowly, intent to listen more than I speak. She paused, then continued. Grounded moment, placing my tablet on the table. The weight of it reminds me of how far I've come. She tapped the pen once on the page, then stopped. She hadn't yet reached the 3rd entry, but something inside her whispered that it was coming. Nadia glanced up just in time to see Riley moving down the aisle again, distributing warm towels on a silver tray. Riley's hand hesitated near her seat, then moved past without offering one. The next towel went to Caldwell, who received it with a bright grin and a "thank you, darling," that made Riley laugh. The laugh was small, controlled, professional, but it wasn't for Nadia. Nadia turned her attention to the window. The airport lights faded as the plane lifted into the sky, gliding into the darkness like a secret sliding into silence. It wasn't just about a towel, or the champagne, or the absence of her name when the greeting was made. It was about what those omissions meant when added up. Rituals mattered, especially when you were not expected to belong. For years, Nadia had trained herself to survive spaces where she wasn't seen as an insider. The small routines became her armor. She chose Seat 1A because it gave her a view without interruption. She selected her meal with intention herb-crusted salmon and heirloom vegetables because it reminded her of home, of Sunday dinners when her mother would grill fish wrapped in lemon slices and rosemary from the garden. The wine, a 2012 Pinot, wasn't about indulgence. It was a quiet luxury she allowed herself, one she didn't feel the need to justify. She ordered it not to prove that she could, but because it was hers to claim. And yet, even in first class, where she'd spent years earning her place, there were moments like this. Moments that stripped the comfort away in one glance, one ignored service, one skipped name. She turned her head slightly and saw Riley approaching again. "Excuse me," Nadia said calmly, looking up. "Will meal service begin soon?" Riley barely broke stride. "Yes, ma'am. Shortly after we reach cruising altitude." "Ma'am," the word echoed in Nadia's ears. "Not Dr. Bennett. Not Miss Bennett. Just ma'am. The same word you used for someone you didn't want to remember." "Thank you," Nadia replied, her voice even. Riley moved past her again. Nadia returned to her notepad. She wrote slowly. Off moment the silence before being excluded. She put the pen down and leaned back in her seat. Her thoughts drifted to a memory 2 years ago. A similar flight, different crew. That time, the meal had been served with care. The wine was poured with reverence, and she was called by name. It shouldn't have been remarkable, but it was, because too often it wasn't. At that moment, she felt her smartwatch vibrate lightly against her wrist. A message had come through encrypted, marked as internal priority. It was from Maya. Flight manifest received. Crew roster includes Riley Shaw, noted for inconsistent feedback, cross-checking incidents. Nadia's fingers hovered over the screen for a second. Then she responded. Continue protocol. Quiet for now. She didn't want to jump ahead, not yet. She wanted to be sure. Dinner service began 20 minutes later. Riley returned with her cart and that same neutral smile. She moved with precision, serving the gentleman in 1C first, then 1D, then 1B. Nadia watched as full meals were placed before them: lamb medallions, roasted duck, black truffle ravioli. Silverware gleamed on linen cloths. Wine was poured tableside. Then Riley stopped at Nadia's seat. "I'm sorry," she said with a controlled tone, "but your meal selection was unavailable. The salmon entree is out of stock. We have a chilled pasta salad or a cold chicken sandwich." Nadia blinked. "I pre-ordered that meal. It was confirmed via email and through the Skylure mobile app. You can check the system." Riley shifted on her heels. "Well, sometimes the manifest gets out of sync. We had to prioritize based on guest tier. There were more pre-orders than meals available." "I'm a Diamond Legacy member," Nadia said, her voice still calm but low, "and I booked this flight 10 days ago. Yes, but it's based on more than just timing. And unfortunately, we can't accommodate everyone." Riley placed a tray in front of her, a plastic-wrapped sandwich, a cup of water, a napkin with no logo, no wine, no silverware, no name, just silence. Nadia looked down at it. Then she looked back up. "Thank you," she said. Riley nodded and moved on. Nadia didn't touch the tray. Not because of pride. Not because the food offended her. She didn't touch it because she needed to remember every detail, every absence, the lack of apology, the lack of her name, the casual way Riley walked away, as though nothing was out of the ordinary, as though Nadia didn't matter, as though this space, this seat, was still not meant for someone like her. Her stomach didn't turn. Her heart didn't race. She had trained herself too well for that. But something inside her did shift. Not the kind of shift that collapses, the kind that straightens, that realigns, that prepares. She opened her tablet again, clicked into a new document, titled it Flight 3701 Incident Record. She began to type, her fingers slow, steady. She documented each detail: the towel, the champagne, the order, the timing, the tone, each one like a puzzle piece, small on its own, unignorable when connected. Behind her, the men in 1C and 1D laughed, talking about stocks and sports and someone named Mark who couldn't land a deal in Singapore. They toasted with wine glasses sparkling in the dim light. Riley laughed at their jokes. No one noticed that Nadia's tray looked like it belonged in the back of the plane. No one noticed that she hadn't spoken again, but they would. Soon, because rituals mattered. And this time, she was rewriting one. Not for herself, but for everyone who had ever been handed the wrong tray and told, without words, that they weren't worth the right one. Dr. Nadia Bennett sat motionless in seat 1A, her arms resting loosely on the padded leather armrests, her gaze fixed on the untouched sandwich before her. Around her, the polished facade of luxury remained uninterrupted. Glasses clinked gently. Silverware scraped porcelain in delicate rhythm. The man in 1C had begun a story involving yachts and investment banking, his voice cutting through the cabin with effortless confidence. But Nadia heard none of it. Her eyes were open, but her mind had turned inward. The cabin, the voices, the hum of the plane, everything began to blur into the background, replaced by the echo of an older memory, a smaller room, a longer table, and a chair that was too far from the center. She had been 33, her first major investor pitch in Silicon Valley, a mahogany boardroom, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, 7 white men seated in pressed shirts and half-smirks. She wore her best suit. Her pitch deck had been refined to perfection. Her voice had been steady. But before she even sat down, one of the executives turned to her and said, "We'll need extra water and coffee before we start." He hadn't looked her in the eye. He had assumed, just like Riley did now, just like Gregory probably would if he passed by. And Nadia, in that moment 10 years ago, had only smiled. "I'll bring the coffee if you let me present the $12 million proposal right after," she had replied. Silence. Then nervous laughter. Then shifting in seats. And, finally, begrudging interest. That day, she didn't win the funding, but she left with something more useful than their money proof that even in the most polished rooms, people still failed to recognize what was in front of them. She exhaled slowly, refocusing on the present. The sandwich tray still sat untouched. The napkin had slid slightly to the side. The water was lukewarm now. The sandwich itself had a faint wrinkle down the plastic wrap, as if even the presentation had given up. A quiet vibration at her wrist interrupted the memory. Her smartwatch glowed with a single message from Maya Lynn. 2 passenger complaints tied to Riley Shaw in the past 18 months, both dismissed. One note reads, "Prioritize based on perceived VIP potential." Flagged. "I'm pulling more." Nadia tapped a brief response. "Keep going. Include Hale in the next sweep." She knew Gregory Hale was on board, senior crew, the one who had nodded politely at the boarding gate but hadn't approached since. He hadn't served any drinks, hadn't checked on her or acknowledged the tray. She'd known people like Gregory all her life. The ones who smiled at the first sign of conflict and stepped back at the second. The ones who saw injustice but kept their hands in their pockets, comforted by the idea that silence wasn't the same as complicity. A flicker of turbulence passed through the aircraft. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and a hushed voice from the cockpit announced they were crossing over Canadian airspace. 8 more hours to Zurich. Nadia reclined her seat slightly and closed her eyes. The hum of the engines became a low lull behind her thoughts. She let herself drift not into sleep, but into another memory. London, age 37. A conference hall filled with over 1,000 attendees. She had just finished a keynote about AI implementation in rural medicine. Applause still rang through her ears when a journalist approached her. "You're the first black woman to make the top 10 CEOs under 40, he said, clipboard in hand. "Do you think your success comes more from diversity programs or from lucky timing?" Lucky timing. She remembered how her lips had pressed into a tight smile. "I think success comes from being doubted 10 times more than your peers and still delivering results 20 times better," she had said, and then she'd walked away. The memory still left a taste in her mouth, half defiance, half fatigue. That fatigue was rising now, not in her body, in her soul. It was the exhaustion of being exceptional over and over just to be treated as standard. The tiredness of carrying the weight of representation without ever being asked if she wanted to. The loneliness of knowing that no matter how many times she earned her seat, there would still be those who saw only what they wanted to see. A woman, a black woman, a guest, not a name, not a title, not a legacy. The clink of a wine bottle being uncorked broke through her reflection. She opened her eyes just in time to see Riley pouring another glass for 1C. The two shared a chuckle over a stock market joke. Riley's hand brushed lightly against the passenger's as she handed over the glass. Then she turned, and once again, passed Nadia without a glance. Nadia didn't move. Her breath was steady. Her fingers rested on her notepad. She let the moment wash over her, not to absorb it, but to document it in her bones. She looked down at her notes again and began a new entry. Pattern service inconsistency, based on demographic assumption. Attention to white male passengers exceeds standard protocol. Ignored passenger high-tier member. Professional credentials known to airline. She paused, then underlined the final line 3 times. It wasn't just about the food. It never was. Food was just the moment it became undeniable. Food was tangible, measurable, visible, but the truth was older, deeper. It was in the way she was greeted, the way she was passed over, the way Riley had spoken with clipped civility, like Nadia was an inconvenience wrapped in politeness. Another message buzzed in. Maya again. Hale had 2 reports on him from 3 years ago, a black executive and an Indian entrepreneur, both in first class, ignored call buttons, no investigation launched. Language and feedback system marked them as non-urgent. I'm running facial tone bias model now. Early output, Riley's engagement level is 74% lower with non-white passengers, based on cabin camera behavior tracking. Nadia closed her eyes. She let the information settle, not as fire, but as fuel. She could feel it now. Not anger, precision, like a surgeon lining up the first incision, like an architect placing the final blueprint line before construction, like a mother correcting a system so her child wouldn't have to face it years from now. She leaned forward and began typing again. This time, not just for her report, but for herself. She wrote, in firm keystrokes, I've been mistaken for an assistant, a nurse, a clerk, a guest. I've smiled through panels where I was the keynote but still asked to sit in the back. I've flown this airline for 8 years, 12 international summits, hundreds of hours. And tonight, I'm still being offered a sandwich wrapped like an afterthought. She paused, then continued. This is no longer a pattern. This is a decision. And tonight, I'll make one of my own. She looked out the window. The sky beyond was endless, a soft blur of stars and dark air. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a woman was no longer asking to be seen. She was writing the rules of visibility. The lights inside the cabin dimmed further as the aircraft crossed into the deep blue of transatlantic airspace. Overhead, a few personal screens glowed quietly, displaying films, silent landscapes, or flight maps tracing their journey toward Zurich. Beneath the hush of a first-class cocoon, a current of tension pulsed unseen to others, but unmistakably real to Dr. Nadia Bennett. She didn't touch the sandwich on her tray, nor the cup of lukewarm water that had started to sweat slightly against the linen napkin. The food no longer mattered. What mattered now was the pattern, the decisions, the omissions, the system. Nadia reached for her tablet again, entering a folder she rarely opened mid-flight. The folder was labeled Iris Live, a portal connected to her company's ethical AI division. Iris wasn't a passenger experience tool. It was designed for healthcare environments, built to detect and correct biases in patient care delivery. But for the last 2 years, she'd partnered with several companies, including Skylure Air, to pilot its application in hospitality and aviation. It was early stage, quiet, hidden behind NDAs and sealed trials. But it was already active on Flight 3721. Nadia logged in using her biometric credentials. The dashboard came to life, a web of glowing data points tracking tone analysis, time-lapsed service intervals, sentiment patterns by facial expression, and voice inflection metrics across passengers. Iris didn't show names, it showed interactions. and Nadia was one of those interactions. She tapped on her own passenger code. The data populated instantly. Service response delayed by 58%, tone analysis neutral to cold name, usage 0. Beverage offer skipped meal discrepancy confirmed. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The truth didn't require celebration. It simply required exposure. She tapped another profile, seat 1C. The man who had received 3 separate wine pours and 2 conversations in less than 20 minutes. Service response above baseline, tone analysis warm, name usage 3, beverage, offer, customized meal confirmation, fulfilled, data didn't lie. It didn't argue. It simply revealed what too many denied. She heard movement down the aisle. Riley's voice, low and confident, filtered toward her again as she laughed with another passenger. The warmth in her tone stood in stark contrast to the clipped indifference she'd shown Nadia earlier. A soft chime broke through her thoughts. Another message from Maya. Iris confirms pattern. Do you want to escalate or observe longer? Nadia stared at the question for a long moment. Her instinct was always to wait, to gather more, to choose silence over conflict. Not because she feared confrontation, but because silence had always been her scalpel. Precise, controlled, unexpected. Still, the weight in her chest pressed differently tonight. She typed back slowly. Observe for now, but prepare escalation path. Notify Skylar Ethics Officer Ellison if breach data exceeds 72%. Maya's reply came within seconds. Understood. Quiet protocol activated. Iris will auto-ping all escalation points if thresholds are crossed. Nadia closed the tablet gently and folded her hands in her lap. The cabin around her hadn't changed. The lights still glowed. The gentle purr of the engines continued. But for the first time that evening, she felt a strange kind of stillness, not as a victim of neglect, but as a witness to her own reclamation. She turned her head toward the window, where the blackness outside mirrored the calm on her face. Somewhere along the flight path, clouds rolled below like waves. The moon cast a soft reflection on the metal wing. And Nadia remembered another night flight years ago from Nairobi to Paris when a junior attendant had whispered to her, "I've never seen someone like you in this cabin." He had meant it as a compliment, but it had stung like revelation, because what he meant was that she didn't fit. Tonight, she wasn't seeking to fit. She was confirming that she no longer needed permission to exist where she already belonged. Across the aisle, a different flight attendant emerged from the galley, a younger man, less polished than Riley, but alert. He glanced toward Nadia, hesitated, then approached slowly. "Dr. Bennett," he said gently, eyes lowered just enough to signal respect but not discomfort. She turned her head slightly, acknowledging him. "I just wanted to check if everything's all right with your dinner," he continued. "I noticed you didn't touch the tray." She studied his face for a moment. He looked uneasy, but sincere. "There seems to have been a mix-up," she said calmly. "I had pre-ordered a meal. It wasn't delivered. I understand." He nodded. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I don't have access to all service decisions, but I'll see if we can do better." His voice lacked Riley's polish, but it held something far more valuable: authenticity. "I appreciate the effort," she replied. He gave a quick nod and retreated toward the galley. It was a small thing, but it wasn't nothing. Still, Nadia knew the truth. Kindness from one crew member didn't undo the pattern of neglect. It didn't erase the weighted history of moments like this. It didn't change the fact that someone in charge had looked at her name and decided she didn't matter. And yet, part of her had softened, not in defeat, but in clarity. You could change a system, but not without breaking the silence it depended on. She picked up her notepad again, wrote an elegant, neat script. This is not about malice. It's about minimization, about who gets the benefit of the doubt, about who gets their name spoken and who gets their presence tolerated. She paused, then added, "Riley doesn't need to raise her voice to tell me I don't belong. She only has to lower it around me." The words sat on the page like stone, weighty, real. She glanced at the time. 6 hours remained in the flight, 6 hours in a flying microcosm of the world she had fought so long to change. Then, as if summoned by the gravity of her thoughts, the man from 1C turned toward her. His expression was one of casual curiosity, like he had finally realized that the woman in C at 1A had spoken not a single word to anyone since takeoff. He raised his glass slightly. "To quiet company," he said with a smirk. Nadia looked at him, held his gaze for 3 seconds, then turned back to her tablet. She didn't reply. Some silences weren't cold. They were strategic, planned, prepared, and this one had a destination. The plane sailed quietly over the Atlantic, suspended in darkness. First class had settled into its usual rhythm, muted conversations, the occasional clink of crystal, and the occasional buzz of cabin announcements, but for Dr. Nadia Bennett, silence no longer meant peace. It meant observation, documentation, pattern recognition. Her tray table was still lowered, though the untouched sandwich had been pushed slightly aside. The edges of the napkin had curled, the water gone warm and flat. Across the aisle, Mr. Caldwell had switched to his third wine glass. He laughed loudly every few minutes, and Riley, his eager audience, laughed along with him. Nadia had stopped hearing them. She had begun watching them instead. She opened her notepad again and wrote at the top in bold, deliberate strokes, "Microaggressions have names, and I remember every single one." Then she underlined the word every. It wasn't anger that fueled her hand. It was clarity, a sharp, calm focus born not of ego, but of years spent watching the smallest gestures become symptoms of larger truths. She thought back to the towel, the champagne, the way Riley had skipped her without hesitation, the way Gregory Hale had walked by 3 times without acknowledging her presence. The chill in their interactions wasn't accidental. It was methodical. Nadia's fingers hovered over the tablet again. She logged into Iris and refreshed the real-time sentiment data. Riley's tone was now labeled warm or engaged in every interaction with one exception, her zero name usage. Eye contact limited to less than 2.5 seconds. No smile detected. Verbal inflection flat. She selected the report and flagged it for export. A copy would be routed to Maya's secure server within minutes. Another message appeared on her screen. Maya Iris AI has finished pattern mapping. Riley's engagement score with male passengers is 76% higher than with female passengers. With white passengers, it's 81% higher than with non-white passengers. Interactions with you are in the 3rd percentile. Nadia stared at the number, 3%, lower than 97% of everyone else on board. She tapped her smartwatch once and whispered quietly, "Begin escalation log. Tag event as discriminatory neglect. Attach Iris summary file 371RS. The AI assistant on her watch beeped in confirmation. The digital dominoes had started to fall. Still, on the surface, Everything remained calm, controlled, unbothered. That, too, was intentional. The strength in Nadia's silence wasn't just about restraint, it was about preparation, about refusing to let others define the narrative before she was ready to speak it. Across the aisle, Riley leaned over Caldwell again, this time offering him a chocolate truffle on a silver tray. "It's from our reserve cart," she said with a soft smile. "We save it for special guests." Caldwell chuckled. "Now you're spoiling me. Riley?" Nadia turned her head just slightly, watching as the tray of truffles bypassed her row entirely. Not even a glance. No acknowledgement that she was seated barely 5 feet away. And yet, Riley's ability to ignore her was complete, invisible, intentional. That was the part most people never saw: the energy it took for someone to erase you without ever being openly cruel. It required effort, rehearsal, a learned form of distance. Riley was an expert. A voice sounded from behind her again, the young male attendant who had spoken with her earlier. He stepped gently toward her seat, clearing his throat softly. "Excuse me, Dr. Bennett. I've spoken with the lead about your meal request. Unfortunately, it looks like the pre-order system wasn't updated in time for this flight." She looked up at him, studying the nervous sincerity in his eyes. "I see," she said. "I also checked with the galley," he added, "and while we can't replicate your original request, I've asked them to prepare a custom warm vegetable medley and bring you a better wine selection." Nadia nodded. "That's kind of you. Thank you for taking the time." He gave a small bow of his head and stepped away, his presence quietly respectful. She returned her gaze to the tablet. The meal correction wouldn't fix what had happened, but she logged it anyway as part of the IRIS report, under attempted resolution, secondary staff. She paused, then added noted sincerity of junior attendant versus indifference of senior crew. Structural failure often hidden in hierarchy. Another ping arrived. This time, it wasn't from Maya. It was from Skylure Air's internal AI system flagging an anomaly in guest satisfaction data mid-flight. The Iris plugin had triggered a soft alert based on discrepancies in tone and service timing. The system had detected imbalance, just as it was designed to do. Nadia tapped her screen and began a formal documentation message. To Skylure Ethics Oversight Subject Discrepancy Report. Flight 3721 message: bias indicators have surpassed threshold. Guest engagement metrics suggest systemic neglect. Iris live data and audio visuals confirm prioritization of specific demographics. Recommend immediate post-flight review and crew audit. Attached visual analysis, tone summary, flight service logs. She pressed send. There was no going back now. She leaned back in her seat and let her breath settle. Outside the window, the night still wrapped itself around the aircraft. Stars dotted the sky like distant witnesses. She thought again of her first trip in first class. She had been 34, newly minted as a Forbes 40 Under 40 CEO, her boarding pass trembling slightly in her hand. She'd worn a navy suit 2 sizes too large and spent the entire flight trying not to take up space. She remembered how the flight attendant that day had smiled and said, "You look like someone with important work to do." That flight had changed everything. This one might, too, but in a different way. She heard footsteps again. Heavy, slower. Male. Gregory Hale. He walked the aisle with the practiced expression of someone who had mastered the art of neutrality. He wasn't unkind, but he was invisible in his own way, slipping past problems, deflecting with a nod, hoping his politeness would mask his inaction. He paused at her row. Finally, "Dr. Bennett," he said, "is everything all right with your flight?" Nadia looked up slowly. "The experience has been illuminating," she replied. Gregory blinked. "I'm glad to hear that I didn't say it was positive," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "I said it was illuminating." He shifted on his feet, clearly unsure of what to say next. "I'll make a note of your feedback," he offered. Nadia tilted her head. "No need. It's already been noted." Gregory offered a tight smile, then walked away. Nadia returned to her notes and wrote when someone finally asks if everything's all right, but only after watching the storm pass. Their timing tells you everything you need to know. She paused again, then wrote the final line for that page. "I am not here to be consoled. I am here to be counted." She closed her notepad and sat still. She was done waiting for others to see what she already knew. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been handed silence instead of service, dismissal instead of dignity, a cold sandwich instead of respect. The glow of cabin lights had faded to a soft amber, casting elongated shadows across the aisle. The passengers in first class were either sleeping or pretending to sleep. Reclined seats, eye masks, a few screens still glimmered, flickering between movies no one was really watching. A comfortable hush draped itself over the space-false calm, like a stage just before a curtain is pulled back. But in seat 1A, Dr. Nadia Bennett remained upright, her body still, her eyes open. She had been quiet long enough. She looked to her right. The small black rectangle embedded into the armrest blinked softly the call button, a feature most passengers use to request a refill of wine or an extra blanket. Nadia's hand hovered over it. She had never used it before, not once in over a decade of flying first class. She didn't press it for more champagne. She didn't need more truffles. What she needed now was presence and accountability. She pressed the button. A soft tone rang out, barely audible, but enough. Within 30 seconds, a pair of footsteps approached from the galley. Riley appeared, her smile polished, her stride practiced. She stopped at Nadia's row with a subtle breath and an arched brow. "Did you need something?" she asked, voice clipped, professional. Nadia met her eyes. The calm in her voice was unmistakable. "I'd like to speak with the purser," she said. Riley blinked. "Excuse me, the purser, Gregory Hale, senior flight supervisor on this leg. Please inform him I'm requesting a direct conversation. Not a check-in, not a courtesy visit, a conversation." Riley paused. For a moment, something behind her eyes flickered resistance, calculation, but she quickly concealed it with her practiced smile. "I'll let him know," she said, then turned and walked away. Nadia leaned back. Outside the window, the night sky stretched endlessly, uninterrupted. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, serene, unmoved. But beneath that stillness, her resolve had taken shape like steel cooled in ice. It was no longer about her own experience. It was about the pattern, the data, the truth she had collected in silence. A few minutes later, Gregory Hale approached. His uniform was pressed, his expression tight with formality. "Dr. Bennett," he said quietly, "you asked to speak with me." Nadia gestured to the empty seat across the aisle. "Have a seat." Gregory hesitated, then sat. Across the space between them, the quiet pulsed with something heavier than air. "I'm listening," he said. Nadia folded her hands on her lap. "I've been observing the service flow of this flight," she began. "Specifically, the discrepancies between passenger interactions." Gregory shifted slightly. "I understand you had a concern about your meal selection," he said. "I did. But that's not what this is about," she said, her tone never rising. "This is about patterns, about the invisible architecture of neglect, and about the silence that allows it to function uninterrupted." Gregory didn't respond. "Not yet. I've been traveling with Skylure Air for over 8 years. Nadia continued. "Diamond Legacy member, private client tier, and yet, this evening, I was not addressed by name, not offered a pre-flight beverage, skipped during towel and wine service, given a meal I didn't order despite confirmation, no explanation, no apology." He began to speak, but she raised her hand gently. "I'm not finished," she said. "Other passengers were addressed by name, offered curated experiences, multiple glasses of wine, even special desserts from your reserve cart." She let the silence stretch, but not collapse. "And I'm not guessing," she added. "I'm not relying on feelings. I have data. I run the team that built the AI you're piloting on this aircraft, the one monitoring passenger engagement and crew service patterns." Gregory blinked. Nadia's voice softened, but the edge of clarity remained. "I've reviewed that data. My engagement score falls in the 3rd percentile. That's not perception. That's a pattern, one your team has repeated and refined." Gregory's face grew pale. "I wasn't aware you weren't supposed to be aware," she said, "because the system was designed to protect comfort, not accountability." A flicker of something moved behind his eyes' defense. Shame. Fear. She couldn't quite tell which. Maybe all three. "I'm not asking for compensation," she said. "I'm not filing a complaint." He furrowed his brow. "You're not." She shook her head once. "No, I'm making a record. Not just for me. For everyone who's been passed over quietly. Because racism, Mr. Hale, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just walks past you with a smile and hands truffles to the man across the aisle." Gregory looked down. "I didn't know this was happening," he said. "I believe you," she replied. "That's part of the problem." Another silence. Then Gregory rose to his feet slowly. I'll look into this. Personally." "You won't need to," Nadia said. "The system already is." He looked at her. "Excuse me. An incident report has been filed through Iris," she said. "Service discrepancies, tone analysis, and behavioral patterns. The ethics team at Skylure received it 10 minutes ago. The CEO, Victor Ellison, will have it on his desk before we land." Gregory's jaw tensed. "This isn't a vendetta," she said. "It's a mirror. Whether you choose to look into it is up to you." He nodded, slowly, then turned and walked away. Nadia sat still. Her chest rose and fell with a quiet calm. Not satisfaction, not victory, just resolve. She reached for her notepad again and wrote, "When you press the call button, you're not asking for help. You're reminding the system that you are not invisible." She placed the pen down, then lifted the tray with the forgotten sandwich and handed it to the passing attendant. "Could you take this away?" she asked kindly. He nodded and quickly removed it, eyes lowered, voice soft. She reclined her seat slightly and looked out the window once more. Stars blinked like signals from another universe. Beyond the glass, the sky didn't care who she was, but she did, and that was enough. Her watch buzzed one last time. Message from Maya Ellison's team acknowledged the report. Flight flagged for priority review upon landing. You'll be contacted directly. Nadia smiled gently, not for her, but for the woman who would sit in seat 1A after her and not be offered a cold sandwich wrapped in silence. Somewhere behind the curtain dividing first class from business, a young girl sat quietly in row 4, seat A. Her legs swung slightly above the floor, her shoes tapping gently against the seat frame. She was no more than 11 or 12, with braids neatly pinned and a red ribbon tied at the end of each plait. Her name was Layla. Layla watched everything. She had noticed the elegant woman seated alone in the first row, the one who hadn't smiled much, but whose stillness held power, the one who wore quiet like armor and whose presence filled more space than the men 2 seats over. Despite their loud voices and expensive shoes, Layla was used to being quiet herself. On flights, at school, at the dinner table. Her mother said it was safer that way. But watching the woman in 1A press the call button had stirred something inside her, a tiny flicker of rebellion. Not loud, but awake. She leaned toward her mother beside her, whispering, "Who's that lady up front?" Her mother barely glanced up from her book. "Someone important?" "I imagine." Layla nodded, but her eyes stayed forward, peering through the narrow gap in the curtain where, just moments ago, the tall flight attendant with slicked-back hair had stood, looking nervous. She could tell something had happened. She'd seen the cold sandwich get taken away. She'd seen the woman's tablet light up over and over, and when the senior attendant had finally sat across from her, Layla hadn't heard the words, but she felt their weight. Layla turned and pulled her notebook from her backpack. It was her flight journal, as she called it. Each time they traveled, she wrote a page, sometimes 2, what she saw, who she imagined the other passengers were, where they were going, who they might be returning to. Today, she drew the woman in 1A, her back straight, her hair in a soft twist, her expression calm, serious. A woman who didn't just sit in her seat, she owned it. She scribbled quietly, "Lady in seat 1A. Looks like she reads minds. I think she's the boss of something big. Maybe the plane." She paused, looked around, then added another line. She made a man in a suit look small, not by yelling, just by being real. In first class. Nadia remained still. She had no idea that 2 rows behind the curtain, a child was sketching her into the shape of a hero, but the moment was already unfolding, quietly, powerfully. The ripple effect of dignity is never loud. It hums beneath the surface, and even children can hear it. Back in row 4, Layla tapped her pencil against her notebook and whispered again, "Do you think someone can be powerful without being mean?" Her mother finally looked at her. "Yes," she said, "real power doesn't need to raise its voice." Layla nodded slowly. Then she glanced forward again and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "She has that kind of power." The cabin lights shifted into night mode. Stars blinked above the clouds outside, a canvas of velvet and silver. Inside, most passengers had reclined, nestled into their pods. A few murmured softly to one another. Some, like Nadia, remained fully awake, aware that even rest had its price when you were used to watching over yourself. Nadia reached for her water and took a quiet sip. She had noticed the child earlier, the one in row 4 with her mother. Their eyes had met briefly during boarding, just a second, but long enough. There was always an unspoken language between black women, even across generations, even from stranger to stranger. It wasn't overt. It didn't need to be. It was acknowledgement, recognition, and something deeper. Hope. Nadia let her gaze drift back to the window, her thoughts stretching beyond the silence. How many Laylas had she once been? How many times had she looked up from the back of a classroom, a conference room, or a plane, wondering if she was allowed to speak? How many rooms had she entered where she'd been the only black woman and taught herself to shrink in order to survive? She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered her first public speaking engagement. She had been 28, the only woman on stage, the only black professional in the building. She'd spoken on AI ethics, her palms slick with fear, her voice trembling, but she'd done it. And afterward, a girl 9, maybe 10, had walked up with a pink journal and said, "You sound like you tell the truth." That moment had kept her going through boardroom smirks, dismissive introductions, and cold sandwiches wrapped in indifference. Maybe tonight would be that moment for Layla, if she had seen even a little. Nadia opened her notepad again and wrote, "There's always someone watching, not to judge, but to learn how to walk through fire without screaming." She placed the pen down slowly. The aircraft hit a soft patch of turbulence, and a quiet chime signaled from overhead. Riley reemerged from the galley, her smile now strained, her steps careful. She moved down the aisle with less ease than before. Nadia watched as she slowed by row 4. "Everything all right here?" Riley asked Layla's mother, her voice gentle. "Yes, we're fine," her mother answered. Layla looked up at Riley, then over her shoulder toward the curtain. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at the attendant, steady, curious, unblinking, made Riley pause for half a second before walking on. Nadia noticed. She noticed everything. Another message appeared on her smartwatch. Maya Ellison's office confirmed receipt of all IRIS logs. They're requesting full playback for internal review. Timeline within 24 hours. Nadia tapped back. Confirm. No follow-up until landing. She closed the message and looked one last time toward row 4. Layla had gone back to drawing, but this time she was sketching 2 figures, one in a tailored coat, the other in a flight attendant uniform. The woman in the coat stood taller. She was smiling, not a wide smile, but the kind you wear when you know who you are, when you've stopped asking to be seen and started demanding to be remembered. The first signs of dawn began to show as a faint purple hue behind the windows. Though most passengers were still dozing in their reclined seats, the aircraft was beginning to stir. Pillows shifted, blankets were quietly folded. Someone coughed in row 6. Another passenger in row 2 requested coffee in a hushed voice. And in seat 1A, Dr. Nadia Bennett opened her eyes. She hadn't slept, not really. Her body had rested. Yes, but her mind had been tracking every subtle vibration of the flight, every footstep, every shift in tone. Her senses, long trained to stay alert in spaces where she was both visible and invisible, never fully turned off. She sat up slowly and smoothed her coat. The air felt different now, less private, more exposed. The world would soon re-enter. She reached for her tablet, checking updates. The IRIS system had completed its flight log processing. Full behavior pattern maps, time-stamped records, tone analysis, cross-comparison between passengers, everything neatly formatted and archived. Her name glowed quietly on the screen tied to a dozen data points that had finally given weight to what people like her had experienced in silence for decades. Not just being ignored, being edited out. in real time. Nadia pressed the screen to sleep mode. She didn't need more evidence. She had enough. Now came the reckoning. The curtain separating first class from business was pulled back gently as crew members began the breakfast service. The scent of reheated croissants drifted into the cabin. Coffee was poured, trays set down. First-class passengers stretched and grumbled, adjusting their seats upright. Caldwell, in 1C, yawned loudly and cracked his knuckles. "Well, good morning," he muttered to no one in particular, then gave a lazy grin to Riley as she passed. "I'll take whatever breakfast you think is worthy of me." Riley smiled tightly, but said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward Nadia's seat for a split second. She knew something had shifted. Nadia noticed the difference not in what Riley said, but in what she didn't say. No good morning, Dr. Bennett, no apology, no attempt at fake warmth, just avoidance and fear. That was new. Not the kind that came from guilt, but the kind that came from knowing your performance was no longer protected by indifference. Gregory Hale appeared shortly afterward, clipboard in hand, his expression unreadable. He walked the aisle with extra deliberation now, stopping at each row, pretending to check meal cards and confirm passenger requests, but he never looked at Nadia. She didn't call him over. She didn't need to. He knew. Instead, she reached into her bag and retrieved a slim gray folder, one she had prepared before even boarding. Inside were printouts of key data visualizations from the IRIS system, color-coded infographics, ratios, a summary of missed service intervals, the kind of cold, empirical truth that didn't leave room for interpretation. She placed it gently on the tray table in front of her. Let it sit there, visible, purposeful, a symbol. Riley returned with her breakfast tray, a perfectly plated meal now, complete with warmed pastry, fresh fruit, and a different bottle of spring water. She didn't say a word as she set it down. Nadia raised her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. Riley nodded once and walked away. Not a word, not a smile, just a transaction. Mechanical, but Nadia knew better than to be distracted by the sudden correctness of it all. Performing politeness after exposure is not the same as respect. It's theater. It always was. Just then, a soft chime echoed through the cabin. The captain's voice followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Zurich shortly. Local time is 6:42 a.m., and weather is clear, 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Please begin preparing for landing and return all seats to the upright position." A quiet bustle took over. Seat backs straightened, screens dimmed, conversations restarted, and beneath it all, the real movement began. 3 rows behind Nadia, a man in a dark suit whispered something into his phone. He wasn't a passenger. He was a corporate liaison from Schuyler Zurich Operations. He had boarded quietly, midair in New York, posing as a passenger. His job, to observe, discreetly, to monitor internal behavior when no one knew they were being watched. But, this time, he hadn't been the one doing the watching. He was now playing catch-up. His voice was quiet, urgent. "She's awake. She's got the data folder out. I believe she knows we're here. No, she hasn't said anything. But, yes, confirming internal review on the ground. Across the aircraft, in the cockpit. A secure message came through from Schuyler's CEO office. Subject Arrival Protocol Flight 371, instruction upon gate docking, detain current flight crew on board for debrief, Senior management from Zurich Terminal will board immediately for closed-door conversation with passenger in seat 1A. Do not release crew until instructed. The wheels were in motion. In row 4, Layla sat upright now, her eyes wide as she sensed the change in energy. She didn't understand every detail, but she felt the pulse of something happening. She turned to her mother. "Is that woman going to change something?" Her mother smiled faintly. She already did. Nadia, unaware of the internal messages crisscrossing behind the scenes, reached into her coat pocket and removed a small photo. It was worn at the edges, folded carefully. Her mother, standing in front of their childhood home in rural Georgia, dressed in her Sunday best, smiling wide with pride and pain tucked just behind her eyes. Beneath the photo, her mother's handwriting read, "Don't just break ceilings, build doorways." Nadia stared at the picture for a moment, then tucked it away. The plane descended smoothly through thin clouds. As the city of Zurich emerged beneath them, sleek roads, quiet rooftops, rivers glinting like threads of light. Nadia felt a slow, sure steadiness rise in her chest. This wasn't the first time she'd faced something like this, but it was the first time the system didn't get to write the story. As the landing gear deployed, Riley came through one last time, collecting breakfast trays. She reached for Nadia's, but paused as she saw the folder. The label on the front was clear. Iris Report, Flight 3721 Service Discrepancy Audit. Riley's hand hesitated. Nadia met her gaze. No anger, no expression, just presence. Riley took the tray silently and walked away. The seatbelt light flicked on. The runway rushed beneath them, and somewhere between the final chime and the wheels touching down, the air shifted again, this time for good. The moment the aircraft touched down in Zurich, there was a shift that only a few noticed, but Nadia felt it immediately. It was the kind of tension that doesn't come from turbulence or a rough landing. This was subtler, quieter, but unmistakable. The plane rolled gently to its gate, the city's early morning light glinting off the tarmac. A slight mist lingered in the distance, curling around airport buildings like a veil. From her window seat in 1A, Nadia could see the jet bridge extending slowly toward the aircraft, mechanical and deliberate. She exhaled once, slowly, then sat upright. Around her, passengers began to stir. Seatbelts unclicked, bags rustled, phones turned back on, glowing like lanterns in a dim cave. Caldwell was already standing, stretching with exaggerated ease, cracking his neck from side to side. What a flight. "Huh?" he said, directing the comment toward no one in particular. Nadia didn't respond. She didn't need to. She wasn't just arriving in Zurich. She was arriving at a moment. Riley walked briskly down the aisle, her posture stiff, her eyes darting toward the cockpit. Gregory Hale emerged soon after and spoke briefly with her in hushed tones. Nadia couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. They knew something was waiting on the other side of that door. From the corner of her eye, Nadia saw two new figures waiting beyond the jet bridge glass, both in suits, not ground staff, not customs, Skylure executives. One was a tall woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. The other, a man holding a tablet in one hand and a leather-bound folder in the other. They weren't there to welcome passengers. They were there to meet her. A soft tone rang overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Zurich. We ask that you remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the captain turns off the seatbelt sign." The voice was neutral, perfectly modulated. But behind it, something in the cabin crew's energy had shifted. There was no small talk, no cheerful farewells, just a quiet wait. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, everyone stood except Nadia. She remained seated, watching the door. Gregory made his way to the front of the cabin, his hands clasped in front of him. His smile was gone. Riley followed behind, keeping a careful distance. Both of them stood near the door, awaiting instructions. And then the knock came. 3 soft raps on the cabin door. The flight attendant nearest to the handle turned and opened it slowly. The silver-haired woman stepped in first. "Good morning," she said, her voice clipped with Swiss precision. "I'm Anna Koenig, Director of Global Guest Relations for Skylure Air." She scanned the cabin, her gaze settling on Nadia almost instantly. "Dr. Bennett," she said with a nod. Nadia rose slowly, smooth and unhurried. "Good morning." Koenig gestured to the man beside her. "This is Alain Deschamps, Head of Ethics and Culture Division." Alain nodded once. "Dr. Bennett, we understand you've had an unacceptable experience." "I've had a revealing one," Nadia replied evenly. Koenig gave a short breath. "We'd like to speak with you privately, if you're willing, before the rest of the passengers deplane. Mr. Deschamps has also prepared an internal briefing for your review. We want to ensure you have full access to how this will be handled." "I'll speak with you," Nadia said, "but not alone." Koenig raised an eyebrow. "Of course. Who would you like present?" Nadia turned slightly toward row 4. "Bring the girl," she said quietly. "Layla." There was a pause. Everyone, including Riley and Gregory, blinked in surprise. Koenig looked hesitant. "She's a minor, ma'am." "I know," Nadia said, "but she saw everything, and one day she'll tell someone about it. I want her to see how a woman like her finishes the story." Koenig glanced toward the aisle. Layla had already stepped forward. Her mother followed close behind, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered to her daughter. "Go on." Nadia smiled gently as Layla joined her side. "Ready?" she asked the girl. Layla nodded. The group moved slowly down the jet bridge together. Passengers behind them watched in confusion. Whispers swirled. Phones tilted slightly to catch a photo, but no one said anything aloud. As they walked, Nadia noticed Riley fidgeting behind them, unsure whether to follow. She turned and called back to her. "Ms. Shaw." Riley froze. "Come with us," Nadia said simply. Gregory took a step forward. "Should I?" "No," Nadia interrupted. "You may wait here." Gregory stopped. The door to the private meeting lounge opened with a soft beep. Inside, the space was quiet, elegant, and minimalistic glass walls, muted tones, and a long table set with water, notepads, and 2 screens. As they entered, Deschamps activated one of the screens. What we are about to review is based on real-time data provided by Iris, our AI guest experience monitoring system. This data was cross-referenced with audio, facial recognition, and tone inflection mapping. He paused. "This is not a presentation. It is an accountability session." Layla sat beside Nadia, her eyes wide. Riley stood stiffly across from them. Deschamps began playing back the data. Each skipped greeting, every absent name mention, the missed towel, the wine glass never poured, the words truffle and reserve offered to other passengers but never to Nadia. The screen lit up with graphs, voice comparisons, and interaction logs. The bias was no longer theoretical, it was visual, measurable. Nadia watched Riley shrink slowly in her chair. Koenig folded her arms and said quietly, "Ms. Shaw, would you like to say anything?" Riley cleared her throat. "I didn't mean to disrespect Dr. Bennett. It wasn't personal. It never is." Nadia replied softly. "That's the problem." The room went still. Layla looked up at Nadia. "Why didn't you yell at them?" Nadia turned to the girl with a soft smile. "Because sometimes power isn't in the volume of your voice," she said. "It's in the weight of your silence and how you use it." Koenig nodded. "Dr. Bennett, I have been instructed to inform you that this crew will be grounded pending full internal review. You will be provided with a formal written apology and offered the opportunity to address our global team. In addition, we are launching a mandatory retraining protocol across all international crews based on this case." Nadia listened without nodding. "I didn't ask for retribution," she said. "I asked for reform. If that's what you're offering, then we're speaking the same language." Deschamps tapped the screen again and brought up a final slide, an updated Skylure policy draft, already in review. The title at the top read The Bennett Standard Guest Dignity Protocol. Layla's eyes lit up. "They named it after you?" she asked. Nadia chuckled. "No, they named it after what I refused to accept." Riley looked down, silent. As the meeting closed, Nadia turned once more to Layla. "Never doubt that your seat, no matter where it is on the plane, deserves respect." Layla nodded solemnly. And in that moment, the jet bridge wasn't just a tunnel between a plane and a terminal. It was a crossing, from silence to truth, from harm to accountability, from the past to the future. Zurich's terminal buzzed with quiet efficiency. Sleek marble floors, gentle overhead announcements in German, French, and English. People moved with purpose, rolling suitcases and weary eyes, greeting loved ones or racing to connecting gates. The world continued, unaware that just beyond gate B-17 something rare had unfolded. Nadia walked through the terminal alone now. Layla and her mother had returned to their travel plans. Riley had been escorted by internal HR staff. Gregory, she assumed, remained behind with ground operations. What stayed with Nadia, however, was not the meeting or the folder of policy changes now secured in her bag. It was Layla's question. Why didn't you yell at them? That question echoed louder than anything else. Because the world so often expected black women to choose between silence or rage, between being dismissed or being called angry, between being complicit or punished for speaking. But what if there was a third path, one forged through presence, calm, proof, and truth? Nadia walked through customs, her passport swiftly stamped, her name, as usual, raised eyebrows. "Dr. Bennett," the officer asked, glancing between her and the screen. "Yes," she replied, offering a patient smile. The officer nodded, handed her documents back, and waved her through. She entered the arrivals lounge. A car was already waiting, one Skylure had sent as a courtesy. A driver in a black suit opened the door with a nod. She settled into the plush leather seat, grateful for a moment of stillness. Her phone buzzed. Maya Lynn formal written apology from Skylure's CEO just came through. Sending it now. Seconds later, the PDF arrived. Nadia opened the file. Subject A, personal apology from Skylure's CEO, Victor Ellison. She read, "Dear Dr. Bennett, I want to express my sincerest apologies for your recent experience aboard Flight 371. It is deeply regrettable that a valued guest such as yourself encountered a level of service that failed to meet the standards we strive to uphold. At Skylure Air, diversity and inclusion are at the heart of our mission, and we are constantly working to better reflect those values. Please know that your feedback has prompted immediate review and retraining of involved staff. We appreciate your loyalty and hope to restore your confidence in us. With respect, Victor Ellison, CEO, Skylure Air. Nadia read the message twice, then a third time. It was polished, grammatically perfect, flawless in form, and utterly hollow. There was no mention of racism, no acknowledgement of systemic bias, no recognition that this wasn't a bad service experience, but an institutional failure. She closed the file. Maya messaged again. Maya Lynn. "You okay?" Nadia typed back, "Yes, but this isn't an apology. It's a PR memo." She sat back in the seat, her fingers drumming lightly on her knee. Outside the window, the sun was rising higher, casting long shadows across Zurich's cobblestone streets. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Will you be attending the AI Summit this morning?" "Dr. Bennett, I will," she said, "but I'm making a stop first." "Very well." They pulled up outside a quiet hotel, not the luxurious one where most guests for the summit were staying. This was simpler, smaller, discreet. She stepped inside, walked past the front desk, and took the elevator to the executive floor. In room 802, she sat down at the desk, powered up her laptop, and opened a new document, an open letter to Skylure Air. She began to type. "You didn't forget my meal. You forgot my name. You forgot my humanity. You forgot the cost of silence and assumed I would carry that cost again. But I won't." She paused, took a breath. "I don't want vouchers. I don't want free miles. I want acknowledgement. I want reform that starts not with optics, but with ownership. Because this wasn't just about a cold sandwich. This was about how systems learn to serve some with care, and others with calculation. I'm writing this for the woman who boards your next flight, who doesn't wear a tailored coat, who doesn't carry titles, and who sits quietly, hoping to simply be seen." Nadia paused again, then added, "And I'm writing it for the little girl in row 4 who already knew what fairness looks like even before you tried to convince her otherwise." She saved the document and sent it to Maya, to her board, to the press. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. Later that morning, at the Global AI and Medicine Summit, Nadia took the stage. The host introduced her as the CEO of Bennett BioSense and pioneer of ethical AI algorithms in healthcare. But the applause that followed wasn't just for her title. It was for her presence. She stood tall, voice steady, and began, "Thank you." This morning, before I speak about AI and medicine, I want to talk about something more human, how we treat each other, especially when no one thinks we're paying attention. She didn't mention the flight. She didn't need to. The room was already listening. And from that stage, a new ripple began, one not of outrage, but of remembering, of seeing, and of deciding that silence would no longer be mistaken for agreement. The morning after the summit, headlines began to bloom across screens like wildfire breaking through dry brush. Not because of the AI keynote, not because of the tech breakthroughs or healthcare policy announcements, but because of a letter. Nadia's open letter had traveled fast. By the time she returned to her hotel room that afternoon, it had been reshared over 20,000 times. Every major U.S. outlet had picked it up. European journalists were calling it an act of composed defiance, and among black professionals, it was being passed like a torch quiet, deliberate and searing. There were no hashtags, no exclamation points, just words firm and clear. You didn't forget my meal. You forgot my humanity. Maya messaged her from New York. Maya Lynn. Your letter is now in Time's top trending op-eds. Skylure stock dropped 3% this morning. Ellison's office just requested a private Zoom. Nadia replied, "Let it ring. I'll be in touch. On my terms." She sat at the small round table by her window, Zurich's rooftops stretching out before her like quiet witnesses. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired, but beneath that fatigue was something steadier. Not pride, not satisfaction, just knowing. For so long, stories like hers disappeared, reduced to misunderstandings, covered over with vague apologies and free upgrades. But now, there was a record, a voice, a ripple, and it wasn't just hers. Later that day, she opened her inbox and found it flooded with hundreds of messages. Some were from strangers, a flight attendant from Atlanta. "I've worked for 12 years and always knew some of us got different rules. Thank you for making it undeniable. A Nigerian med student, I watched you speak at the summit. You said, 'The body remembers what systems deny.' I cried. Thank you for existing." A teacher in Chicago. "My 7th grade students read your letter this morning. They asked if they could write their own stories about being overlooked. I said yes. Each message, a ripple, each voice, a thread." She kept reading until her eyes blurred. Then she stood, stepped away from the screen, and let the sun hit her face through the hotel window. She whispered, "Let them keep coming." By the following morning, Skylure was in full damage control mode. Victor Ellison appeared on Bloomberg News, seated stiffly under lights, his tie just slightly crooked. The anchor's first question was direct. "Doctor, Nadia Bennett's letter has reached over 12 million people in 36 hours. She has not called for a boycott, yet thousands are canceling bookings. Has Skylure issued a direct apology or met her new standards?" Ellison blinked, clearing his throat. "We're actively engaging with Dr. Bennett's office. What happened does not reflect who we are as a company. We take diversity seriously. Do you now acknowledge that what occurred was racial bias?" There was a pause, a long one. "I can't speak to the intent of the individuals involved," he said. "But I acknowledge her experience and her courage in coming forward." It wasn't enough. By noon, one of Skylure's board members resigned. By 4 p.m., the company's VP of Culture posted her own statement subtler, but unmistakably in support of Nadia's position. And by midnight, a leaked memo showed internal Slack messages between crew managers that included comments like, "Don't worry, this will blow over. She's just playing the race card." The fire reignited. This time, hotter. Nadia didn't fan the flames. She didn't post another word. But she didn't need to. Others were speaking now. Loudly, within 48 hours, an ex-Skylure employee posted her own story about being told to whiten up her accent on international flights. A former black pilot revealed that he'd been repeatedly overlooked for promotions despite superior flight hours. A transgender passenger shared how their preferred name was openly mocked by staff. The ripple was becoming a wave. And yet, in the middle of it all, Nadia remained grounded. Still, measured. She was not building a firestorm. She was opening a door. That evening, she received a call. This time, she answered. Victor Ellison's voice came through, controlled and cautious. "Dr. Bennett," he began, "I want to thank you for taking the time I didn't schedule this to be thanked," she said. He paused. "Fair enough." Silence. Then she said, "This is not just about retraining flight staff. or suspending a crew. It's about how your systems were designed to reward invisibility and punish disruption. You've built an environment where discrimination thrives in subtlety. That's what needs dismantling. We're ready to do that, he said quickly. No, she replied. You're ready to appear like you're doing it. He exhaled. Then tell me what you want. Not PR, not perception, but reality. Nadia leaned back in her chair. I want a seat on your ethics advisory board, permanent, not honorary. I want the IRIS system made public and independently audited every quarter. And I want every incident like mine reported transparently, not hidden behind NDAs. That's a lot, he said, almost incredulous. It's the minimum, she replied, because you didn't just fail me. You failed every silent passenger who came before me and every Layla who would have believed you were fair because you said you were. He was quiet for a long time. Then finally, we'll make it happen. You have my word. Nadia didn't smile. She didn't need his word. She had her own. And now, it echoed louder than ever. When the call ended, she didn't feel victorious. She felt steady. She looked out at the city again, the lights below, the quiet hum of traffic, the sense that real change wasn't sudden. It didn't crash. It didn't shout. It moved like water, persistent, patient, unstoppable. The ripple had become a current, and it was carrying them all forward. 2 weeks after Flight 371 landed in Zurich, a new plaque was installed at Skylure Air's corporate headquarters in New York City. It was understated, placed beside the main elevator in a quiet corner where most visitors wouldn't notice unless they were looking. But those who did would pause. The inscription read, "The Bennett Standard, a commitment to human dignity in every cabin. Established March 2025, no ribbon cutting, no press release, just a gesture, one that finally said, 'We remember.'" But Nadia wasn't in New York to see it. She'd flown back to Atlanta, quietly, without alerting the media. No first-class drama this time. No hidden observers or whispering staff. Just a seat by the window and a cup of hot tea. She chose not to speak on that flight, not out of fear or bitterness, but out of peace. She let the silence speak for her. A silence no longer forced, but owned. The kind of silence that follows a long storm. When the air clears, when the work of healing begins. She spent the first days at home in stillness, no interviews, no panels, just walking through her garden, running her fingers along the rosemary bush her mother once planted. And then, one afternoon, her doorbell rang. On the porch stood a small figure with a backpack and a wide, curious smile. Layla. Her mother stood behind her, smiling. "I hope this isn't too forward," she said. "We had a layover in Atlanta. Layla begged me to find you. She wrote something she wanted to share." Layla stepped forward and pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper. "I wrote it in class," she said. "It's about you." Nadia sat on the porch step, motioning for Layla to sit beside her. "May I hear it?" Layla unfolded the paper and began to read, stumbling a little over her own handwriting. "My hero is someone who didn't shout, but everyone heard her anyway. She didn't fight with her fists, she fought with her mind, and she didn't try to be famous. She tried to be fair. Her name is Dr. Nadia Bennett, and she changed the rules not just for planes, but for what people like me believe is possible." Nadia felt the tears prick the corners of her eyes, not from sorrow, but something gentler, something rare, belonging. She hugged Layla tightly, whispering, You're going to change more than I ever could." That evening, after they left, Nadia sat in her study and stared at a photo of her mother on a bookshelf. "Doorways," she said aloud, "not ceilings. You were right." The next day, she returned to work. Her company, Bennett Biosense, was in the final phase of launching a new AI model that used biometric markers to predict autoimmune flare-ups weeks before symptoms appeared. But, for the first time, she insisted the launch press conference include something else. A statement not just of innovation, but of ethics. She walked to the podium. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to share what this company stands for, not just in science, but in spirit." She paused, glancing at the room full of reporters and researchers. "I boarded a plane last month as a CEO and left it reminded that no title protects you from being unseen. But what we do after we are seen, that's what defines our legacy." She continued, steady and calm. "In our algorithms, in our policies, in our partnerships, we will not code indifference. We will not automate silence. We will remember that dignity isn't a feature, it's a foundation." That quote was printed the next day in the Wall Street Journal. Later that month, when Skylure officially announced the formation of its independent ethics board, Dr. Nadia Bennett was named its inaugural chair. And, at her request, the first order of business wasn't to review training manuals, it was to invite passengers, real passengers, nurses, factory workers, students, grandmothers, veterans, people who had experienced invisibility so long they stopped expecting anything else. Nadia sat in those sessions quietly, listening, taking notes. When one man broke down explaining how he had once been handcuffed mid-flight for asking for his heart medication, she didn't offer platitudes. She simply reached across the table and held his hand until he could breathe again. That's what leadership looked like now. Not commanding from a stage, but showing up at the table, listening deeply, acting boldly, and never forgetting who was left behind when systems moved too fast. The final ripple came months later, when Nadia was invited to speak at a university commencement. She wore a simple navy gown and no makeup. Her speech was short, just 8 minutes. She looked out at the sea of graduates and said, "There will be rooms where you are overlooked, meetings where your ideas are repeated louder by someone else, flights where your name is forgotten, and moments where justice looks too far out of reach. But I want you to remember something. You are not invisible. You are undeniable. And when they try to close a door in front of you, build another one." She stepped back. The silence that followed was deeper than applause. It was reverence. And it lasted. Nadia never trademarked the Bennett standard. She refused to sell it as a corporate policy to other airlines. Instead, she made it public open source, a living document that anyone, anywhere, could adapt and adopt. And they did. Within a year, 4 other airlines introduced similar initiatives. Universities cited it in business ethics classes. Activists used its language in petitions. It became a symbol not of perfection, but of progress. And through it all, Nadia remained the same. Quiet, focused, grounded. A woman who understood that sometimes the most powerful gate you walk through is the one you build yourself, not with anger, not with revenge, but with integrity, and the kind of courage that whispers rather than shouts yet changes everything it touches. Sometimes, the most powerful response isn't a raised voice, it's quiet conviction backed by truth. Dr. Nadia Bennett didn't scream. She didn't beg. She let the silence speak, until the world had no choice but to listen. Her journey on Flight 3721 reminds us all respect should never depend on race, title, or appearance, and dignity is not a luxury, it is a birthright. In a world that still too often asks marginalized voices to stay quiet or not make a scene, this story is a call to remember C people, say their names, and never confuse silence for consent. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up for those who are unseen, unheard, and underestimated, then help us spread the message. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice, celebrate courage, and lift voices that matter. We'll see you in the next chapter.